Hello, Underdog Leadership Podcast listeners. Jenny Mitchell here with another new season, new venture, new opportunity. It'd be dull if we did it always the same way. But this one feels really special because this season, on season 3, you're going to hear each of 12 women's stories, 12 women CEOs writing and speaking about their chapter in a collaborative women's leadership book that will be in your hands if you're on the sign up list in fall of 2023. So Jenny Mitchell and Chavender are birthing, along with the support of a very important person that you're going to get to meet today, a collaborative women's leadership book. Each of us will have a chapter, but also rooted inside the book will be the learnings of Dr. Megan Rabine, who has done the research and developed these 6 pillars of women's leadership journeys. When I listened to her presentation, it was like she was talking to me, the experiences I'd had as a woman leader. And so inside this beautiful book, and during the next 13 episodes of this podcast, I am going to be bringing you these gorgeous golden nuggets of stories and of the special people who are here to share them with you. So that is the manifesto of season 3. And to join me and to talk about and to kick off this whole season, I have our editor for the book, among other things. Welcome, Michelle Fishering.
Hi, Jenny. I'm so excited to be here. Just as you were sharing that manifesto, I was just re-inspired. But I've been living with these stories and with these women and their experiences for months now. And still, it was just really inspiring. And I'm so excited to get to listen to them actually speak about the stories that they're writing in a new way. So I'm really looking forward to the whole season.
Exactly. So snuggle down in your couch, grab something warm to drink, and we're going to kind of walk you through the behind the scenes on this podcast of some of the things that we did, some of the things we set up. I think maybe the most important place to start is what are our roles? So I am, of course, the owner of Chavender, which is my not-for-profit leadership arm. I also have the Underdog Leadership Podcast, which speaks to the breadth of my expertise as an executive coach and the new place that I am playing in, which is women's leadership. I am owning it and I am putting a stake in the ground because the things that I have learned, I have discovered are common and familiar and we can address them. And that's what we want to do on this podcast today. And then the project we're talking about is this collaborative leadership book, which has no name. We haven't named it yet. Michelle and I are going to get at that very soon, but this is so new. So just for a context of where we're at in the process as well, we met in March in Toronto, where we wrote our stories. The women have been writing and completing their stories. At this point now, most of them are in. And so this is kind of like the first public conversation, Michelle, about this whole process, which is exciting and kind of daunting too. Where do you start? Where would you start?
All the things. Yeah. I will say that part of the reason that there's not a title yet is, okay, I have a great analogy. Okay. So you used the term earlier, you said we're birthing this book, right? And in that context, I would be something along the lines of like the doula, the midwife. I'm helping guide and support and mentor and lead. And then also, doing the work of bringing this book into the world. And it's kind of like not necessarily giving your kid a name until it's born, right? Yeah. Like you need to see it. You need to hold it in your hands before you can know what the right combination of words that really that characterize, that give identity, that pull it all together. And so we've been, ideas have been kicking around, but until we see it as a whole unit, as a real thing, I think we're in agreement. And I just want to use that as a way to kind of kick this off, that until we're at that point and we see what each of these stories really is at its heart.
Yep.
I think we were both in agreement that coming up with a title before that felt really prescriptive. Like we were telling this book what it had to be instead of letting the stories create what it will be. Is that
I can,
esoteric? Did I just
oh,
get a little weird?
yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that's exactly it. And we've really worked hard. We're going to talk more about collaboration and women in a minute. But we've really worked hard to create the space for this book. And I love your word about not being prescriptive, guiding for sure. And for those of you that are planning on listening to the rest of the season, we do have a bit of a structure to each of the episodes, but not a formal hard structure. One of the fun moments is when Sherry Schaefer, my co-coach in Chavender, actually interviews me. So I become on the other side of the seat. So these are examples of kind of how we see this thing unfolding. And here's our commitment to you as listeners. We actually see the podcast season 3 as a compendium, as like a mini mastermind, if you will, on women's leadership. A little bit of an insight into things that people have experienced. There's always takeaways. Every single episode, my commitment to you, you give your time, your ears to us to listen for half an hour. And the commitment is that there will be takeaways, there will be aha moments that you can go and implement in your world. But I think the power of it is that it's not just my voice. It's my voice along amplified by another 12 leaders with different perspectives. So I can guarantee you, dear listener, someone in this group will sincerely resonate at your soul level. Full stop. Hey, Michelle?
Yes, 100%. I don't think there's a piece, a chapter, or an idea that I've spoken with or a woman that I've connected with in this group that has not shared something that yes, I know this experience. I know what this feels
Yep.
like. I've been there in my own way. And I have a completely different background and experience than most of these women.
Yep.
And yet it's so interesting how our experiences and the things that we're dealing with and the emotions are all, there's so many connections, and we can learn so much from how these women have gone through this and moved through their experiences. So I just, again, cannot wait to hear what they're going to talk about here on the podcast, and marry that with the chapters that they've written in this book. It's just, I'm so thrilled for that.
And it's really funny how the personalities of the people that come through the podcast come right through the words. Like you think there'd be this weird disjunct, I don't know, but no, you hear their voices. And that's something I'm really proud of, it this sort of, I don't know if the word's vulnerable or direct or raw or sincere or authentic, pick what word you want that resonates with you. But these are real, I think you said, Michelle, in the trenches stories. So one of the premises of Chavender and of Underdog Leadership, the podcast, is that mentorship and coaching are part of the solution. They are the way, the path. That group conversations, that sharing your story, owning your own narrative are part of the way that we heal. I'm going to use that word intentionally, but also that we grow from there and who we become. So I want to just talk a minute about collaboration in the context of women's leadership. I actually have done just some brief research on it, and there'll be more of this research coming up. But if you're a man listening to this podcast, this is a great chance for you to understand how your people in your world, your women in your world, how they think. And I just wanted to highlight a couple of key points from the research. Collaboration among women is about women raising their voices to empower and bring change to their communities. Duh, right? We know that. But here's one that's interesting. The intersections of social identities and power relations shape women's collaboration. So, Michelle, anecdotally, I can tell you that the women leaders that I know, they don't need to learn politics. Most of the time they get it at like a base intrinsic level, and those power dynamics are like just part of what makes them skilled leaders. And that also comes up in some of the stories. Would you agree that you have that experience as well with some of these smart women leaders?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And there is this element of like an innate understanding of power dynamics and of the way we're seen and viewed.
Seen.
Right? Seen is one. I mean, that's a big one. That's in a lot of the stories. It's not the main theme. I don't think, well, maybe there's one or two where it's an important theme, but
Yeah.
it's a sort of a sub theme. It's this undertone in almost every story, in almost every experience of these women that we're working with. and understanding how to navigate through that and
Yep.
through the office politics and through the a lot of these women work in organizations where there's a lot of structures. So with maybe CEOs of or leaders of the board or different, maybe people who are their peers in the rest of the larger organization, or not just with the people who work for them or under them, but how
I'm
they've
interrupting
navigated
you.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm going to
please
interrupt you, but I
do.
was going to say perception. Remember, like how they're
Yes.
perceived. So not just what they think about
Yes.
themselves, but how they're perceived is very interesting and
Yes.
definitely comes up as a theme, right?
Absolutely. And so that power dynamic there is fascinating and is one that I found unexpected. I think it resonated very deeply because I saw that in my own journey, but I think until it was called out, I wasn't able to identify it in my own
Yeah,
journey. So it was really helpful to see it through the lens of other women and then apply that to my own experience. And that's where that level of mentorship,
that's right. And that's what gets
how this can work as mentorship, right? When
right.
you read this story and you are being guided into someone else's experience, it helps you reflect on your own in a new way.
Yeah, and that's why you're like, just as you've drunk the Kool-Aid, Michelle, right? Because once you see yourself in the stories, you're so committed. And just for those of you that are listening, just to sort of situate us in this trifecta of things, the Underdog Leadership Podcast is all about helping number twos become number ones. And I think a lot of that has to do with perception, internal and external. I think this book lands like square inside the listener community that I have created with Underdog Leadership Podcast. I want to be better at my job. I'm ambitious. How do I get there? And why? How do I get over the way people think of me? And I think that that's an old paradigm that we need to release, this idea that when we're kind and compassionate to people, that immediately means we can't be bold, ambitious, and clear. And this comes up in some of the stories too. I'm thinking of Megan Rabines in particular, where she goes from sort of acting the role of leader to embodying the role of leader. Those were kind of her words. And she took it on and she owned it. And that realization that the thing was like, she can explain it better than I can, but a lot of the stories have that, that concept of realization that I have sovereignty over my choices and I choose differently this time. One of the play, we'll see where we land, but the word overcoming always comes to mind when I read these stories. How about you?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and it's overcoming in an interesting way because I think it's not in every story, but I think often the overcoming is it's overcoming our
Yeah.
own stuff. um, there are a few of them where in fact, let me rephrase that. Every story, there's an overcoming of an external obstacle as well. There's things that were put in there that came up in the path, but over and over again, there was this theme of overcoming our own limiting beliefs about what leadership means and how we show up as leaders. And so that's something that I saw over and over again was women who were modeled how to be leaders, often by men, but not always. And maybe not just modeled, maybe specifically told that
To
this is how you need
survive.
to lead. Yes, this is how you need to lead. And deciding, going through a series of experiences that opened in every instance that opened these women up into realizing that actually I already know how to lead. I know who I want to show up as. I know how I want to embody the role of leader. And it is stepping into that. If that's the empowerment, that's like stepping into knowing that your way is the great way, right? Like not just okay, right? Not just knowing that your way is
Oh my
okay.
God.
It's your right way is that, what is right for you. And often it meant collaboration. It meant being a more collaborative leader. It meant showing up authentically as yourself and not trying to fit into someone else's box or someone else's perception, back to that, of what it meant to be a leader and really defining that for yourself.
Okay, so if you're listening and you are inspired, if there's something here, like let's start right now, Michelle, at every turn in these episodes, I'm going to turn to you, the listeners, and say, What can you do today? What do you choose to do today to change the perception of how you are seen at your office, in your house, with your kids, with your
Yes.
spouse, all of those things? We're just going to keep putting these plugs in.
Yeah.
So let's go into the process of writing a collaborative book, because you were saying to me, like, of course, the story is that I've been thinking about writing a book forever, like literally 6 or 7 years. It's been on my to-do list and I have never done it, Michelle. And I'm
That's
sure
not
you've,
that's not unusual. Just
yeah, right. So, and because it just sort of went in the task pile, not the fun pile. And the minute I met you through some connections and we started talking about this idea of collaborating on something, I was like, well, why don't we bring in some more people? And all of a sudden the book took on this life and this energy that it didn't have before. And the word fun really comes to mind, right? How could we make this fun? So I'd be interested from your side. What do you remember about those first sessions with me about this casting a vision? Like, what do you remember? What sticks in your mind? Tell me more about that process.
Well, when you put two visionaries in a room and two idea women in a
Ideas.
room, we just like, I mean, all the ideas. But I remember there being very clearly being an energy and a momentum just from day one. It was, and not a frenetic pressure like I want to tick this off the to-do list this year or
Yeah.
something like that. It was this like when you just said it was fun, I wanted it to be fun. That's what it felt like. It felt like this. This is the energy I describe it. Is this like I can't not do it
Mhm.
because I'm so all in. I'm so
Yeah.
like I want this vision. I'm ready to bring this forth. Let's do it. What do we need to do? Who do we need to bring in? How can we get this going? And it took all of the limiting beliefs and all of the pressure. And I'm not saying that you have to write collaboratively in order to get this kind of energy, but I will say that it's something that the women have commented on,
Yes.
that they would never have done this on their own, and that it was the experience of doing it, of writing this as a group, and all of the places where, Jenny, you intentionally built in additional space for collaboration, additional touch points, additional connections. And that's what has made it, I think, fun, even when it's been a little scary, even when it's
Yeah.
been stretchy, fun for everybody. And just this like adventure that we're all on together. And that energy has been not only clear from day one, but I think it's such a big, I mean, like the maybe foundation of why this has moved forward in such a way.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you. And those, I think you've highlighted that it's not a traditional book. There's not a lot of models for this too. So just for context, I'm friends with everybody. Like if you meet me, I am a very trusting person. If you come at me with your honest self, I will meet you there. And it was kind of a leap of faith to say, I'm going to get 12 women, throw them in a room, and they're all going to like each other. And it's going to be amazing, right? We did scaffold some things. So if you're listening thinking, how could I do this myself? So the scaffolding was we had 2 1-hour calls, one for introductions and one for conversation before the weekend. And then we spent the Friday on the logistics, the Friday to Sunday together, which we intentionally had writing sections, but we also had play sections. Like I'm thinking of the Saturday night dinner when we went out for dinner and there was this big long table of us and we basically took over the restaurant, Michelle, didn't we?
I mean, we totally did.
Yeah.
They loved us.
Yeah. We
I
took
mean,
over
who
our
wouldn't love
energy.
us?
Right. Well, our energy was infectious. And I think this is the kind of energy that's in the book. But we kept looking for models in the publishing world. And really the only one you found that you've mentioned to me is the book, Our Bodies, Ourselves. Maybe you can
Yeah.
expand on that.
Yeah. So I should just like write this down and like, I don't know, on my hand or something so I can remember it. It's the Boston Women's Health Collective. But I don't know. I think it was back in the 70s.
Yeah.
Should again have done my
I have a
research or
copy.
like more,
Yep.
right? Like I should like nail this down. But this group of women came together and saw that had this concern that women were not able to access accurate or complete information about their bodies and sexuality and all the things, right? But they were going to male doctors who were not diagnosing them correctly, were not giving them correct information about very simple, well, what we would look at today as like fairly straightforward health information. And they saw this as a problem. So this group of women came together and used their experience and their expertise to write a book that then has been published. And I can't even tell you how many editions for years and years and years. I think the last edition was done in 2011. But so this group of women came together to bring their stories, their wisdom, their experience, put it in a book and create impact with that. And to me, that's the type of collaboration. This goes beyond an anthology. This goes beyond a multi-author book. This goes beyond so many of the structures that we might be familiar with, because it is this true sense of collaboration, a shared, like coming together under a shared vision to create impact and to leave this, my term, which is intellectual legacy, but like leave this legacy of our experiences and our wisdom. Every one of these women had someone in mind that they were writing this book for. And whether that was a daughter-in-law, a niece, someone in their organization who they saw themselves as a mentor to that person. And so there's this paying it forward to the next generation, that this impact, we're doing this to leave something, to leave the world better than we found it, right? And to come together under that energy. And I don't think that this is something that exists. I don't think that this is common. I think that what we're creating is something really spectacular. And it is that collaborative element and that true collective, you use that term, that collective, that I want to say sisterhood, but I don't know if that term really resonates. But, it's this group of women coming together. And I just think there's so much to be said for that.
Yeah, Heather Nelson talked about social impact women carried in social impact. And it's true. Every single one of the women in the book, either by definition of their organization or by definition of their work, had that idea of the greater good. And that definitely comes through in the stories, the imparting and the sharing piece. This is not to hoard. This is to improve and expand future generations. So let's talk about these universal themes. Interestingly
Jenny,
enough, yeah, go ahead. Go.
I want to say something before you move on, because you just said something that's really important. These women are all driven by this like social impact, and yes, these are all impact driven women. And I think maybe because of that, it was that much harder for them to turn the lens on themselves. So not that they weren't all in and ready to create impact, but I just want to say that these are not women who are used to, despite the fact that they're leaders in their organizations, these are not women who are used to being in the limelight. They're not women who are used to doing the look at me. They're used to doing their work for their cause. Or for their organization or for their team, right? It's always turning it around, like, who am I serving, right? Who am I serving with my work? I'm standing up and standing for what I believe in because it's for my team or for this, right? And so it was very difficult, I would say, for every one of these women to put themselves and to center themselves in their experience in order to be of service. And I just think that's an important thing to highlight here. This was not an easy task, I don't think, for any of the women who contributed.
Yeah. Thanks for that. I remember my biggest fear when I was writing my chapter was that it would be glib. Yeah. It was like the ultimate insult, that it would be something fluffy or glib, and I wanted to be sincere. So, I certainly think that my journey, if I can be autobiographical, putting my face out there, getting more public, showing, sharing more of me and what I stand for has not been an easy journey. I'm getting more comfortable every day. But what I'm learning is that the more I take up space, it's almost counterintuitive. The more I take up space, the more space there is for others.
Yes. 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 Brilliant. I love it.
I thought it was finite space, right? If I take up too much space, then there's no room. And it's actually the opposite, because I give permission to others to take up space and say and speak their truth and all those things. So I wrote down that, when we talk about these stories, they're both singular and universal. We sound like we're in a philosophy book, but they're like singular in the sense that they're very specific. but the themes are very universal, right? And keeping in mind, this is 12 stories, right? This isn't like, a whole compendium of, it's not a research project, but with these 12, I'd love for you to articulate, because you're kind of our sober second thought, right, Michelle? You kind of have a bit more perspective. And full disclosure, at this point in the recording of the podcast, I've only seen the stories of the women who I'm interviewing. I have not yet seen all the stories. And not only that, the women are just clamoring to see each other's stories. So what are these threads? What do you see, Michelle? Tell us.
It's just kind of entertaining. It just occurred to me how much power I have right now.
I know you do.
Okay. So, I mean, I could talk about this all day long. I mean, we could talk about most things all day long. So let me be clear about that. But so some of the really interesting things that we haven't talked about, or we haven't gone into a ton of depth on, one of them that I found interesting was how in almost every story, the woman whose story it is has zero doubt in her own ability. She is certain in her ability as a leader. She is certain in her ability to get results. She is certain. Now, it doesn't mean that she doesn't have, that she's not riddled with with doubts and with fears and things like that. But ultimately, she knows that that should she be given the opportunity, she's got this. And that, just think about what that could do in the world if not hampered by all of the doubts of other people, that perception of other people. And so I just think that would, in every one of these stories, I had this, it was this consistent theme of just, I know I can do this. Stop doubting me. Give me the chance. So I thought that was a really interesting one.
Yeah. And, I'm thinking about like Arlene Dickinson, one of my sort of role models, with her book Persuasion, which is all about marketing. And, she kind of alludes to this, that as women, we don't have big sticks. We don't tend to go for the big stick approach. And so it makes us really good. We have full confidence, Michelle, in ourselves, and it makes us really good at working and bringing around it's a very different style. And often, I'm going to sound like a soapbox again, it can be perceived as, I think, quickly labeled as weak or ineffective. And I would challenge you that it is much more sticky. It lasts longer. You have relationships that are so much deeper and can get you further. But I love the way you've highlighted that we had full confidence in ourselves. Mm-hmm. It was the way other people saw us.
And sometimes the way other people saw these women, the way other people see us, erodes that confidence.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you start high and then you kind of come down here a little bit. But it's also interesting because one of those pieces that I felt like came up again and again was women giving themselves permission to have that collaborative approach and to be a collaborative leader. And where they're saying, there's this other element of kind of then proving themselves, right? Because if people don't think that I can, well, then I have to prove myself. Yep. And again, this is where sometimes that proving is maybe healthy and sometimes that proving is maybe unhealthy. And I use the term healthy and unhealthy, just, it's maybe not the best way for you. Sometimes that proving resulted in doing the lone wolf thing, in being like, I got to do everything on my own. I can't rely on anyone else. I have to do this. Everyone's looking to me. I have to do everything and I have to do it right.
Perfect.
This has to be perfect. And that's a lot of pressure and is obviously unhealthy because this is not real, right? Yeah. No one can do this. And then on the other side, there's this proving that usually came, interestingly, when the women were in roles in, okay, I'm going to try to, I might be making some generalizations here, but this is what is coming up for me. When these women were leading in a way that was not their highest and aligned with who they really were, and they were leading in a way that they felt they should, there was often turnover in their organizations. As in, maybe the other people, well, again, now I'm just like making some bold claims here. Maybe the people in the organization could sense that. Maybe there was this disconnect. Maybe when you're trying to lead as somebody else, people don't want to be around that. Or maybe maybe other places seem more, the grass is greener on the other side. I don't know. But that there were more than one story talks about big turnover being a trigger to step into a different way and give themselves that permission to lead as themselves and not as somebody expects them to. So those things all kind of tie together in that it's like this proving energy, but what that proves is that actually
it's not right.
Don't be trying to prove yourself, because that's never the right way.
Yeah. And this, of course, our sector and the world is dealing with this turnover and these sort of high expectations of the next generation, not necessarily high, just expectations, right? To be seen as whole people. And, towing the line, the corporate line, is no longer kind of as we used to make martyrs of those people. And now we're sort of being invited to really, that, I don't want to use the word ethical, but that idea of alignment and what can I stand and what can I not stand. And a lot of these stories are about making different choices. With the gift of hindsight, you see things a lot very differently. A couple of the women talk about no, like speaking of unhealthy, when you say no, it behooves you to dig in and go harder and prove yourself. Like, talk about a recipe for a mental health breakdown, for example.
Right. It's like there's a version of that that's persistence, right? There's a version that's persistence and that's resilience, and that's, not just getting one person, one little roadblock and then just giving up, right? There's a version that's persistence. And then there's a version that I don't know that that's how we want the next generation to lead, right? And just because as an individual, that's a lot of pressure.
Well, and it almost, something I've been thinking about, this is the first time I'm saying this out loud, but borderline narcissistic about it, where it's come around so far that it's all about you. Mm-hmm. And when you, like, culture has a smell. You come in after a leader and nobody will make a move without running it up the food chain and running it back down. And that's a good example of when that narcissism and that it started as excellence and it became obsession, maybe. And we can't, as humans, live in those kinds of environments for very long. And when you leave, the machine falls apart. And so, I can speak here with me and my listener friends here, just a couple of thousands of people, to say, like, control, right? Women's desire for control. And then the flip side of that, of letting go of control and what it means to you as a woman versus as a man, I think is very different. These common threads. You talked about the lone wolf. I have to do it myself. All of that. I totally resonate. Right.
Right. And that's often, and I think, again, speaking specifically to this audience, I think that is really common in that number two position. So when you're the number two, we've talked about this many times, I know well, because I was in that position for a long time. And you're doing all the things. You're taking care of it. You're making sure that everything happens so that your number one, your leader, can do their job as a leader. And so we're so used to just doing everything and taking care of everything and making, and I don't have children, but I'm sure that when you're a mom, you're also in that role at home, taking care of everything, making sure everyone has everything they need. And so I think it's really easy to fall into that pattern. And when you step out of that and actually empower your team, empower your people, and realize that actually asking for help it's not even asking for help. It's literally that, you can't do it. You can't do this job on your own.
So it's like, what's coming up is the difference between rescuing and supporting, right? When you swoop in and rescue your staff versus empowering your staff. I mean, this is a process, right? And we could go into a whole podcast about trust. But I think those are things just to be aware of. That might be a little aha watch moment for those of you listening, to how much am I rescuing and how much am I empowering? It's a very fine line. But boy, it makes a difference we know autonomy is one of the most important things for people at work. If they feel like they have sovereignty over their tasks and their roles, and they're not, I don't even like the word micromanaging, but when somebody's going to clean up and fix it or change it 12 times before you're done,
Yes.
What is the incentive to own it, people?
There is none.
There's none.
And I just actually read one of the lady stories, the most recent one that I read last night. And she actually says something really interesting because she said that when she was a number two, stepped into the number one position, and immediately everyone stopped considering her a peer or somebody that,
Right.
and so she was surrounded by yes men. Right. And people just, she might have known it was a bad idea, but have said something to like get the wheels turning. And everyone's like, oh, yeah, that's great. Love that.
Yeah.
And she has actually learned to say, I'm just throwing this idea out there, to
Yes.
preface it, right? To
Yeah.
like give that and to empower and educate her team that just because I say something does not mean that it's the idea or that it's
Yeah.
the way.
Yep.
It's me saying something to like is this a good idea? Let's talk about it. Like, is this terrible? Did I just say like literally like the worst thing ever? Let's talk through it. And so she's had to find ways to inspire that in her team. And I think that's just another example of this sense of, yes, it's empowering your team to do their work. It's also empowering your team to speak up and
Yeah.
to not just take ownership of their work, but it's the organization as a whole. And if you're not the type of leader who's coming in and just, again, that big stick and that like my way is the way, but people might be used to that. So
Yeah.
learning how to break them out of that habit and your people can be really helpful.
It goes back
But
to
that
that
was
word
really interesting.
perception, right? It's funny. They
Mm-hmm.
give a title to someone and there's all these assumptions that go with it, is what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But you haven't, and I know one of the stories talks about how they haven't changed. They're the same person. They just have a different title, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, okay, unexpected elements. Talk to me about that, like things that were surprises. Although, granted, we hadn't done this before, but unexpected. What came up?
Okay. So for me, I would say, okay, so there were several unexpected things that came up, or maybe not unexpected, but it was really interesting to see how it came up. But for me personally, I was really blown away by how impactful it was for me to spend time with these women and hearing their stories and asking the right questions. And it turns out that I have spent much more time than I expected. Not that would be needed in any kind of negative way, just
Yep.
I didn't expect to asked to be so supportive, and has been amazing because I have seen how much these women needed to tell their stories
Yeah.
and to have the outside perspective of me, an unbiased, unaffiliated person, to help them kind of process through and see some new things. And that ties into probably the biggest thing that is not a surprise, because this is always what people end up saying, but it's always something that just thrills me, is how many women felt healed by this process.
Mm-hmm.
That whether they've healed a specific situation or it's given them permission to release something they've
Yep.
held on to,
Yep.
I think everyone has spoken about that experience. And I've been really, really excited by that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like coming to terms with something a little
Yeah.
bit too, right? Like coming to terms with a story or a narrative, or filing your paperwork like in your head about something. I want to pick up on the word reflection. There was a couple of things there's the reflection to Michelle, right? It's when you go and talk to Michelle about the stories, and those were so well received by the women, just to have like you said, impartial, but also this reflection to, we did storytelling with each other in person, and the way how it felt for someone to tell your story back to you, what they'd heard, to be, what is it, Brene Brown, seen, heard, and valued. The power of listening in this busy digital world, and to slow down and to give the gift of reflection. Oh, that might be a moment for those of you listening to take away to your office, the gift of reflection, right? The gift to provide that for your direct reports. That was a word that's really coming up in my age, Michelle. I'm craving more reflection in my life, less doing, more being. more embodying, to use one of the favorite words. How about you? Did that come up, reflection?
I mean, I do. I think so. And I think because we invited the women to fold reflection into their
Yep.
stories, right? And
Yep.
to really, that being a big way of kind of, again, paying it forward and
Yep.
intentionally teasing out and calling out these reflections. And I think that it's so important to look back on an experience. In a lot of instances, these were kind of pivotal experiences or moments that
Yep.
really defined a trajectory. And for a lot of these women, as for a lot of us, our careers and our businesses are such a big part of our lives that when we say that it was like this pivotal moment from a career standpoint, it's often also a pivotal moment, from self identity and all the things. And so I think that taking that time for reflection is so important and is really, really valuable. And it is that being seen, heard, and valued, and
Mm-hmm.
knowing that you're saying something that the person receiving it cares to listen to.
Cares.
Which I say that because I feel like that's so rare in our, which is very sad, but I think that that's rare in our this day and age where we're all so busy and we're all so,
Yeah.
so to have people care about what you're
Yeah.
saying is.
I had this like visual of the wheels and the cogs, and this perception that we're just cogs in a wheel that get
Yeah.
inserted. Oop, there you go. You're this role and you do this thing, right? Oop, you get inserted here. And that's is the antithesis of this book. It requires thoughtfulness. It requires paring down of your schedules. It requires, we all go into these meetings. What's coming up for me is like, we got to get through this, 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 and this, right? Yes, we do. And Zoom has created this world where we show up at 12:01 and we go through our things. But the opportunity to reflect back to somebody, hear something, help them determine something or make a decision for themselves, that process is the gift that keeps giving. It's not because then the next time they hit that obstacle, they'll be able to do it themselves. So let me give a quick analogy from my music world, which is kind of fun. If you were relying on your teacher to teach you every single phrase and fingering in every single Bach partita, then you would need your teacher forever, because you'd be constantly going back to your teacher, say, what's the fingering on that? How do I do that phrasing? But if you're the kind of teacher that shows them what the best practice is, or shows them how they would do it, and then invites them to explore what the best fingering is for that next phrase when they encounter it, you've actually got something that's got sustainability and legs to it. And that means that they are actually able to grow on their own, rather than always having to go back to the well to say, and what was the fingering on bar 7, right?
Yeah.
That just came to mind for me. And I think that's a great analogy for the
I
kind of
love
leadership
that.
I want to support.
But isn't that also like, it just can't, something, I don't know, maybe this is already a terminology, but there's the idea of servant leadership, which, can bring up some things that might be sticky for some people. But it's kind of like this mentor leadership where you're mentor. I mean, what you're describing is mentorship. You're not
Yeah.
telling people how to solve it.
Yes.
You're not asking them, coaching is that very like asking them questions to pull it out, but you're leading by example. You're saying, this is how I've done it.
Right. Right.
And let's give you the space to see it in your way. And I feel like there's this really powerful like that's what mentorship is, and that's why it's so valuable, not only to seek it out, but then when you're
Yeah.
in that position to provide it for somebody else, to make that a priority.
And it's a lot easier to tell them what to do. It's a lot faster to tell them what
So
to
much
do,
easier.
right? But if you really,
or to just do
yeah,
it all yourself. I mean,
right, to a finite amount, right? And then you can't bicycle any faster. It's really interesting because I think, you either decide you're developing people, or you decide like, I don't think there's a gray line there. You actually have to make the decision that you're developing the people. And when I hear people talk about retention, and I'm on a side note, but it's an important one, retention, recruitment, right? Because I'm always talking about executive coaching as a solution to these challenges, retention and recruitment, because there's nothing more powerful than saying to someone, I believe in you. I'm going to go to bat for you, and I'm going to get an executive coach for you to help you with these things. Because that's when you say, I care about you. And rather than just it's kind of the shareholder model. Like you're making money for the shareholders. Yes, that's a goal, or, in different worlds and not for profit.
Right.
But at some point it's like you take all the topsoil off the top and you've destroyed everything underneath, which in a company is
Yes.
the people.
Right.
There's nothing left to reap and sow. And so
Right.
it's a finite game versus this idea of developing and growing talent and commitment. Like, to me, it's so stupid. Like, how could you possibly think that there is anything more important than the people in your company?
Absolutely. I mean, it's regeneration, it's
It's
symbiosis, it's an
regeneration.
ecosystem. Just like any other ecosystem, we can either strip it bare and then move on to the next thing, or we can
Yeah.
put back. And in
Build
fact, sometimes we put back
better.
and it builds, because then it starts building itself.
Yeah.
Right. So it's
Yeah.
not about putting an input. I mean, I'm a farmer, so I am
Yeah.
immediately running with this analogy, but it's not like putting fertilizer, which
Yeah.
then it becomes dependent on fertilizer. It's about regenerating from the bottom up, like getting it in there.
Yeah.
And then it becomes this self-fulfilling ecosystem where everything is in symbiosis, everything is working together, everything is supporting everything else.
Yeah.
And that's when you have true health
Yeah.
and true, I mean, we're taking it far beyond
Yeah.
sustainability when we talk
Yeah.
about that, right? But I mean, yes, this is where we talk about building people and building team and all of that.
It's funny because I have a course called Planting Relationship Seeds, like on purpose, right? Because relationships are won and lost in the conversations that are had. So now I'm really in a rabbit hole, but
I know.
this book was kind of part of this experience of these relationships, of these stories. There's so much richness. I'm going there. But now we're in the weeds and I'm going there. I love it.
I love it.
My dad jokes are coming in. If you've listened this far, and thank you, first of all, for listening all the way to the end of this podcast, because it really does kind of set the stage for what you're going to hear in season 3. And I just want to put a plug in here for how you can be a part of this. This does not have any meaning if it's just 12 women that talk to each other and say, weren't we great? This book has meaning when you share it. This book has meaning when you buy a copy, when you give it to someone. Well, we're talking with the launch about doing a book club, a series of book clubs, so that people can come together and sort of share and talk. We're talking about circles, having learning circles for the launch. But the most important thing for you to do right now is to click subscribe. If this has resonated with you, if this has landed with something that deep in your soul, that you want more of this, please click subscribe. If you want to get on the VIP list, what you need to do is send me an email, jenny@chavender.com. That's Chavender, like lavender, but with a CH at the beginning, and it's Jenny with a Y. And I will get you on the VIP list for the book that has no name, right, Michelle?
I mean, kind of want to just use that. The book that has no names
The book that has no
is
name.
awesome in and of itself.
Oh my gosh.
I
Any final words, Michelle, before we let everyone go?
No. I just think maybe that seconding that call to action, right? And not in the cheesy marketing way of call to action, but in a way that really this creates impact. This creates the impact it was meant to create when we action it. And when you, as a listener, action it, when you, again, buy a copy for your new graduate, or right, this is this is the kind of book that is going to give so much to the people who read it. And again, it really requires not just consumption, not just being passive, but truly actioning and acting and being part of it. So again, Jenny, right? Jenny gave you all the ways. We're going to have some really cool, exciting ways to truly be a part of this book. So connect, stay tuned. I am on pins and needles waiting for the rest of these episodes. And I hope you are too, because I know they're going to be incredible.
Oh, thank you, everyone. We'll put in a link in the show notes to the VIP list as well. Thank you so much for listening to our kickoff episode. So much good stuff to come. Have a great day. Go be great.